Okay, so we're trying to stream part 2. My YouTube studio is not being very cooperative. I don't yet know how much of part 1 got streamed. Fortunately, we didn't write a heck of a lot of code, and in terms of PHP code, we've written 0. So all we've done basically is build an HTML form with 2 inputs and a submit button, and then we've got this blank PHP form. We want to add some code here so we can start to interpret and process our inputs. So on my save person page, I'm going to open a set of PHP tags. And the first thing we'll do here is store the form inputs in variables. This is an optional step, but it's always a good idea to take our form values and put them into variables. And here's why. If we go here. So this is the form value. So we're going to have 2 post values. We're going one called name and one called email. The syntax here is a lot longer than if we just stick it in a variable, because we're going to want to use those values later, as we talked about before the break, to save those inputs to the database. So we could save this value directly, but it's a lot more typing, and it's got brackets, quotes, and underscores, a lot more subject to error. If we put it in a variable instead, it's going to be a little easier to work with. So I'm going to create a variable called name. And notice your code editor, whether you're using PHP Storm or Visual Studio Code, once you type the $_ it should bring up this $_ post. And then in square brackets and single quotes, I'll create a second variable. So then maybe we just want to print these values out to the screen for now. Eventually, we want to save them in our database. We're not connected to the database yet. We just want to see, can we capture correctly whatever the user typed in our form? So what command would we use here? We want to print something to the screen. Okay, so we'll use an echo command. And we could do it this way, name, and email. Now, notice we've used double quotes here. There's a reason for that. We'll try it with single quotes as well after if we can get it to work. But we'll try it like this first. So I'm going to save this page. I'll bring up my browser and let me resize it so you can see the code. So we're going to grab the 2 values from the post array, and we'll just output them in a string. And we've included a line break tag, so the name should be on the first line, and the email should be on the line below. So I could either go back, or I could just hit refresh, and it gives us this. So why did we get this error? It says there is nothing, so this is throwing an error, and this is throwing an error. Whoops, sorry. I'll give you a hint. There's nothing wrong with the code on this page. The problem is actually on our first page. We need to change something on our form so that this code executes properly. Why do you suppose it's saying that post name and post email are undefined? Sorry? Right, we haven't specified that the method our form uses is post. And how we can actually tell, because we saw this here. When our form uses get, the inputs the user typed in wind up being appended onto the end of our URL. Whenever you see this, this means the form method is get. So we didn't specify get, we didn't specify anything. So to fix this, what do I need to add here? So when we run it this way, we'll notice two things are different. The inputs are no longer added on to the end of the URL. And our error saying the post fields are undefined, those errors should go away. So in this class, we're almost always going to use the post method on our forms, but you have to explicitly add it. If you don't, it will use the get method instead. So I'll change my form, save it. So now I'm going to reload my form. Because we've used the post method, PHP can interpret the two values that I type. If I enter something else, whatever I've entered shows up on the next page. And if we look at the URL, those form inputs are no longer here. So we want to be sure we use this method equals post on all our forms. It's critically important on a lot of forms, especially for security. Right? Post is going to be much more secure than get. Why? Imagine our form's asking for a username and password, or it's asking for a credit card number and expiry. We never want to use get on those forms. Why not? Right, because, and why does get not protect the data? Right, it shows it in the URL, so anybody standing behind us could actually see the password or credit card number we entered. It also is tracked in your browser history. So anybody else who uses the browser can actually see any form inputs that were entered. So we always want to use post. There's actually only one common time get is ever used. Anybody have any idea when would you commonly see get being used on forms for one specific purpose? Could be. Yeah. I'll pull up actually a couple of home pages. May as well pull up a couple of the sites we looked at last week. We were talking about dynamic content and static content in web applications. Our internet connection's pretty brutal today. Come on. Every day. Okay. So let's see how my cybersecurity fund is doing. Okay, this uses get in a way, and let's see, maybe probably see it here. So search forms tend to use get and not post. Okay, how can you tell here that it's using get and not post? Right, the end of our URL has parameters that includes a value that Amazon named field keywords, and it includes whatever I entered in the search box. If I enter PHP, it's now frozen, which is awesome. I suspect my VPN connection probably isn't helping. So we will typically see get being used for search. And we'll see whatever the user typed in the search box. Right now it's got PHP plus MySQL. So we'll commonly see get on search forms. We don't typically see it anywhere else for the reasons that Ralph said. more secure that all of those form inputs do not show up in the address bar and they don't show up in the user's browser history. But if we exclude method equals post, we're going to have get instead. Okay. So here's our save person. So we can write this with double quotes. We could also write it with single quotes, but the syntax is a little different. When we use double quotes in PHP, notice we can just inject the variable right into the string, and it gets interpreted. I'm going to try the exact same string, single quotes. Maybe I'll just comment that one out for now. So we're going to try the exact same echo statement, but with single quotes rather than doubles. So I'll just click refresh. My browser says, do you want to resubmit the same form data? And I'll click resend. And here's what it gives me. So notice the quotes really affect the output. With double quotes in PHP, you can put PHP variables right inside and those variables will get interpreted properly. If you use single quotes, it doesn't treat those values as variables, it just treats those as literal strings. So this doesn't look very good. So if I want to insert my variables here, I actually need to concatenate the variables outside of the single quotes like this. Now these two are equivalent. I'll resubmit, and now I get the same values. So in theory, it looks like line 15 is a lot better than line 16, right? It's easier to type. We're less likely to make a mistake by missing a dot or having quotes in the wrong places. So in this simple example, it looks like the double quotes are better. We actually will use the single quotes often when we're trying to echo out some static content as well as PHP values. And the reason has to do with HTML attributes. Let's say I wanted to do this instead. So I might want to do something like this. H4 class equals many times when we're printing statements, we want HTML formatting around it, and those HTML elements have certain attributes. Often they'll be CSS. So double quotes inside of other double quotes becomes messy and problematic. So if we don't need HTML attributes, then line 15 is easier. Just put the whole thing in double quotes. It's less syntax, it's less error prone. But if we might want to include HTML tags inside of our messages or our output, using single quotes around the whole thing's probably going to be easier. I mean, we don't have any class defined here. So you can use either one, but you need to be aware of the difference between the single and doubles. Anybody have questions about what we're doing here so far? Yeah, if when we're outputting content that's dynamic, we want to include some kind of HTML layout or wrapping around it, there's a good chance those HTML tags will include attributes. And typically the most common one is going to be a class. And we need, for proper HTML formatting, those attribute values also always have to go in double quotes. So if I tried to add it here, I would need to, so Jeffrey, if I wanted that H4 tag on line 15, we'd need to escape those double quotes. So we either wind up with 3 sets of double quotes or we need a backslash in front of it to escape it. So it will work that way, but it's probably easier to use single quotes around the whole thing and then the double quotes around our HTML attribute values. So these might also be things like they might be LI tags, they might be TR and TD tags if we're showing dynamic data in a grid or in a list. Around every element, we're going to want some kind of HTML tags for how that should be formatted. Maybe we're displaying images, where the list of images is dynamic from our database, and we need to generate an IMG tag around each one. So it's common that we've got these attributes inside where we need those double quotes. Technically, a browser would render it without the double quotes here. But somewhere there'd be an HTML developer named Jessica or Scott McCrindle whose blood pressure would be going through the roof if you didn't put double quotes around your HTML attribute values. So if we just go back and look at our process, we've kind of done step 1. We can capture the form inputs. We haven't done any of the other things. I do want to show you 2 other super common errors that cause our forms not to work. This is a really simple example. Here's a really common one. We'll break it. So I'm going to change line 11 and resubmit it. So whenever on your page that processes a form, whenever you see undefined index, kind of a vague error, but it actually means something very specific. What does it mean, undefined index name on line 11? Why does it generate this error? Okay. Yes. So why does it happen? So email works, but name doesn't work. Because the attributes from my form inputs are case sensitive. They have to match exactly. If I call it lowercase name here, I have to refer to it as post lowercase name here. So you need to be consistent in how you name your objects. And they are case sensitive as well. So typically, I will use camel case on how I name things, and then I shouldn't get this undefined index. We're all going to get it at some point in the semester. We'll create a form control with one name, and we'll try to read it on our PHP page with it using a different name, and we'll get undefined index. Here's the other thing that's going to happen. I guarantee it. At least several of you are going to do this. People will make an appointment or come to office hours or send me a link and say, my form looks good. And when I click submit, nothing happens. Okay. If your submit button doesn't live inside the form tag, it just is there for decoration. Nothing actually happens when you click it. So all I did was move line 19. After my closing form tag, my form no longer works. Or the other thing that happens is people will build the form, but they'll forget the actual form opening and closing tag because those tags aren't visible, right? You don't see anything from line 9 and line 18. So if I take those out, my form looks correct, but it doesn't do anything. It can't be submitted without the form tags. So these are fairly common oversights when we're building the forms that happen. Generally, building the forms is pretty easy. Those are things commonly, I'm just as likely as you are to make those mistakes. So that's the first thing to check. If your form looks okay and it doesn't submit, did I actually remember a form tag, an opening and closing, and is the button inside of them? And are all of the input inside of them? Okay. So now we need to look at the other parts of the process. How do we connect to the database? And then how do we do these other things? How do we take, say, the name value and the email value and then actually insert them into some table? We have. Okay. Here's a quick activity for you. It is in the lesson 2 folder. If you open up this document that says connection exercise, it won't take you very long. To download the file, enable editing. So here's the structure of a PHP page that tries to connect to a database. You'll notice it's color-coded into sections. So some lines are some colors are one line only, some of them, like the red, is 3 lines together. Here's what I want you to do. Take a few minutes, drag and drop sections or cut and paste sections until you think the code is in the right order. This is all the correct code, but it's all the order of it. The sequence is all messed up. So drag it around. See if you can put it in the order it needs to go in so that it could successfully try to connect to the database. Our video did record for 17 minutes before, so most of it should be in the video. Does anybody need a bit more time with this? Still working on it. Give you another minute or two to kick it around, and then we'll review it together. Okay. Which color should be first at the top of this file? Yep, okay, so we'll put the doc type. That could be our very first thing. Okay, what would be next? Okay, so we've got the kind of orange HTML. Okay. Our blue head tag. Dark blue title. What would be next? Okay, yep, so the bright green head would be next. Okay, our opening PHP tag. What would we do next? Which color? Yeah, so the gray. So this is the key line in the whole file. So this is where we're creating a variable called DB, and we're trying to connect to the database, and our connection string has basically 5 pieces of information in it. We're using an object or a library called PDO. That stands for PHP Data Objects. So this is the library that allows a PHP page to connect to any kind of database. Now, if you look at code samples online, you may see another library. There's an older library called MySQL or MySQLi. So when I first started teaching the course, that was the standard library PHP developers used to connect to a database. The limits with that were it only worked for MySQL databases, didn't allow you to connect to other kinds of databases. So PDO is newer, and that allows us to connect to MySQL, but it also would allow us to connect to Access or Oracle or SQL Server or anything else. So the first parameter we pass in is what kind of database are we connecting to? In this class, we're only ever going to be connecting to MySQL. And then our 4 standard parameters, the host, our user, your database name, which for in our case on AWS, our database name and our username is the same. And then the password. So we're going to be typing this line quite a bit over the next few weeks until you start to learn it. Great interview question for an introductory or co-op PHP developer. Write the connection string from a PHP page to a MySQL database. What values go in there and how does it look? So we're trying to create a new connection here. So what line, what color is next? Yeah, actually the if statement is in the right place. So try to connect. And if we don't have a connection, print an error message. So what should come after that red block? Yeah, then our else, we can print a message. And what comes next? Right. what's happening? What is this db equals null? What is that doing? It empties the variable, yes. And what does that actually do? Closes the connection. Okay. This is critical. Our page will still work if we don't disconnect, but we should always in PHP be closing our connections when we're done with them. Why? Sorry? Okay, that's one reason, yep. Right, if we have, the server can only support so many requests at a time. Let's say it supports 5,000 requests at a time. So 5,000 people ask for a web page that opens a database connection. What happens when the 5,001st person tries to request that page and there's already 5,000 connections open? What does that next person see, or what happens in their browser? Might be access denied, or won't be 404. Actually, they'll see, right? They see this. It's waiting. It can't connect because there's all these other connections that are open, and there's only so many connections that are available. So the rule is, especially in PHP, as soon as we're done working with the database, close that connection so another request doesn't have to wait, hopefully, to access it. Our page still works if we don't do this, but if our site gets busy and not failing to close our connection, it's going to slow things down. And many times the database and the web server, they're separate machines. Usually, they're separate computers on the same network. So it takes time for traffic to go back and forth between them. And then what should the next thing be? Yeah, we'll close the PHP and we'll close the body. So there's our code basically in order. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to run this, I'll try to connect both to my AWS database as well as connecting locally, and you can do either one. I've already put the server in there for AWS. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to copy all this for a minute. Copy everything. I'm going to make a new PHP file. I'll just call it connection.php. And I'm going to paste all that code in the order that you guys have put it in, which is the correct order. So now I need to put in my database and username. And I'll have to go dig out my password. I really have no choice but to show it to everybody on YouTube. Don't delete my database. I'm going to have to show it every week. So I'm going to go and just dig out my AWS password. I mean, you need the VPN connection anyway to get in. Yes, I'm publishing this online, but without the VPN connection, no one else can access it anyway. Let's see if I look at this. Well, nothing really wants to work today. Come on. Maybe I'll have to use both browser to go and get my AWS password. So I'm going to save my file. And now I'm going to see if it loads. So I will go to lesson 2. And I'll see if I can connect to my AWS database. I'm also going to try in a minute connecting to my local SQL server. Okay. So it's tried to connect to AWS. Connection attempt failed because the connected party did not respond. So there's an issue with that. I have an old AWS connection from previous. So what I'm going to do is I'll try that one instead. So if you have an old connection, a number of you said your FTP still worked from before. I'm going to try my older one. This one's a little different. In this one, the host is sql.computerstudies. And I'll just have to go and find my old credential for this. I will do it locally as well. So you can use your new AWS connection if it works. You can try your old one if it works. You can also try your local server. So I'm going to try my older one. So this is my original account. We'll see if our connection works now. Hold on, maybe it's. Let me try one more time. Okay, so I may not be able to connect to AWS today. If not, I'll run everything locally. And we'll sort out the connection with the technician. I'm just going to try through here and see if I can connect to my database through Workbench. Huh, that's interesting. Okay, so our database connection is not going to run for me today on AWS. I'm going to have to see why it's not running as it needs to be set up for us. All right. In this case, what I'm going to do is connect to my local server. Now, my local MySQL server is already running. Yours probably is not. So you may want to bring back up your XAMPP or MAMP control panel. And if there's a port number here beside MySQL, your service is running. And this button would say stop. If your MySQL service is not running, you want to click the start button beside it. This will start your local database server. It may be running, or if you start it, click start, and it gives you a message saying it's already running, fine, no problem. So start your service. And we'll create a new database in our local server for today. I'm going to call my database W20 for winter 20, and I'll put in my local username. And the default when you install MySQL is just root with no password. So you'll put in whatever credential you're using in your database class to access your local server. If you did not put in any password, you installed MySQL, then your username and password is the same as mine. These are the defaults if you don't change them. Okay. We'll go over this again next week if your system's not where it needs to be. Okay. And also, you can make an appointment with me Monday or Tuesday afternoon if you need help getting it set up. So what I'm going to do then, I'll just close this. So I'm going to create a database and create a table in my local database. And then I want to try and save those person records in there. So I'll open up my SQL Workbench. And I have my local connection saved. It just runs on my local host. So I'll just open it up. Oh, I told you to start the server. I didn't start my own server. I thought it was already running. Okay, now my server is running. So I've got a local database. And I should have just this empty query tab. So I'm going to create a database that I will call W20. So this is going to create a new empty database on my local server. I'll just click the execute button here. I get a little green check mark saying that it was okay. And over here in this little schemas window, it shows me the list of tables in my database. If I just hit this little refresh icon, here's my W20 database. It's empty. So there's nothing in here. You can just, if you just click on query and new tab to current server, it'll open this little window for you. If you don't see that window, through the query menu, new tab. So we'll just create a database. And I'm just going to update this quick script on Blackboard that we can then copy and run. So if you're able to connect to your database, if you refresh your lesson 2 folder, here's a simple script we can run that's going to create a table called persons. And it's going to have 3 columns. An ID column that the database will automatically assign, and then a column for the name and a column for the email. So we want to be able to save data from our form into this table. So I'm going to copy that. And then I want to highlight everything. I don't need to run the create database command again. I only want to run that once. So I'll just comment that one out. Actually, so I want to run this script using my new database, create this table. So down at the bottom, I get green check marks saying it created the table, and it actually shows me now I have a table called persons with 3 columns: person ID, name, and email. There's no data in it, it's empty. We try to look in the table. We have this empty cells. There's nothing here. I'll redo this process next week on the AWS database, because ultimately we want the table to be on AWS, not just local. So I am recording this and we will go over it again. So now we have our form to collect names and emails. We have a table in the database that can store names and emails. So now we need to add the PHP code to our save page that connects to the database, and we'll insert the name and email values. In effect, save the person to the database. So I'm going to come back here. So now what we want to do is connect to the database, set up the SQL, insert, execute the save method, and disconnect. So we've already captured the inputs and variables, and then we want to do those 4 things down below. Connect, set up, and execute our save, and then disconnect. And once we try this, we can look in the database and see hopefully something is in there. Whoops. Actually, you know what we can do? I know I have a workaround for anybody who's having problems setting up their database. Give me a second. I can set up a database on my own server. I'll share the credential and everybody can connect to it. This will just take me a minute to do. If you're having any problems with your own server today, we can all just use one database. Yeah? If it works, great, use it. By all means. This is, I'm trying to think of show some workarounds if AWS isn't working. If it's working, that's excellent. I'm not sure why mine is not. Okay, bear with me for just a second. I'll set up a shared database. We can all connect to it. It's open. As long as you have the username, password, and address, you'll be able to access it. Will problem solve. And you also get to see what it looks like, how you might create a MySQL database on a host. So I'll go into my SQL area. This is a hosting account where I host a number of client websites. So I'm going to add a new database. I'll give it the same name, Winter20. And it'll be a MySQL 8 database. We'll keep it nice and simple. Our username can be COMP1006. And our password can be all in lowercase, help me 20. Okay. So I'll show you the connection credentials you need in your code, and then I need to run the same script in this database because it's empty. I need to build the person's table in here. So I'll build the table, and then you can all save data to it. Okay, maybe I know. Okay, maybe the third time will be a challenge. Okay, so here are the credentials you need. The host for today, if you need my database, is mysql7.loosefoot.com. The database name is W20. The username is COMP1006. And the password is helpme20. So everybody should be able to connect now with this credential. In fact, if I test it, I'll put this in my connection.php file. And I should be able to connect to this database now. I'll put the code back up in just 1 second. Just want to make sure it works. Localhost. Oops, sorry. Host equals. My apologies, I left that out. Okay, so with that line, thanks for your patience. We had a workaround. This connection line will get you connected to the database. I had missed this part. So host equals. Yep, question. It should show the message on line 15, connected to the database. If you see that, you're connected. So that database is empty. That person's table I just created in my local database, I need to reconnect. I need to now run that in this database so we can all save data to it. So I'll try to leave the code up as I do this so you can see, we can both see what we're doing at the same time. So I did a disconnect locally. So I'll set up my connection to my new database. And I'll build the table in there. If we don't get this completely finished today, that's okay. We can finish it next week. So I'm going to run the exact same script. This will build a persons table here. So I need to make sure I add here host equals. So everybody should be able to connect to this database. You can connect to AWS, you can connect locally, whatever works. This one will definitely work for everybody. So now we need to set up a really simple insert statement. Have you guys done this in your relational database or not yet? Or you haven't done anything. You just told and you'll get to practice it more in your database class. So if we want to create new records in the database, we use the command insert. And here's the syntax. Insert into, and then we name the table we want to insert into. So what's the name of our table in the database that we just built? That's the database name is W20, but the table is one container inside. What table name did I just build? Right, we want to insert into the persons table. Then we open a set of round brackets, and in here we list the columns we want to insert into. So we have a name column, and we have an email column. We also have an ID column, but those values are assigned automatically by the database. You'll talk about this more in your relational database class later. And then we have the keyword values. Set up our two placeholders. One for the name and one for the email. So we're not inserting the values yet. We're setting up places for the name and email values to go. And that's what those colons indicate. These are placeholders that we will fill in a minute. So we're saying here, we're going to provide you a name and an email value, which we're going to do next. I'll create one more variable. So this is where we combine our connection to our database, basically the two variables above. We have a connection, we have an SQL statement, but our SQL statement still doesn't have the values we want to save. So we need to populate those values one at a time. And to do that, we use this command variable. We'll go over this again next week. And our command variable has this bind parameter method. So what we want to do is use this method so that we can stick our name value in this placeholder. And then we can stick our email value in this placeholder. So we'll take our name placeholder and we'll fill it with our name variable that comes from the user input. And we also have to say this is going to be a string that's maximum 50 characters, because that's how big we made the name field in the database. The user tries to add 60 characters, only the first 50 will get saved. The 10 characters to the end will get ignored. We're going to do the same thing to fill the email. So now those two placeholders, name and email, they're being filled with our name and email variables that we created up here. Okay, so those values get passed along a few times. From the form to our variables, from our variables into the placeholders or parameters in SQL. If we run the code right now, we should get no errors, but nothing's going to happen. We haven't actually sent the data to the database yet. So we have to do one last thing with our command. It has an execute method. So this will actually trigger this insert statement and save the new person to the database. And then we can destroy our connection. So now we've done all of the steps we laid out in the slide. We've grabbed the user's inputs, connected to the database, set up a way to add these values, and executed the transaction. So now we can try it. I realize there's a lot of steps there. There's no way to half do this. If we don't do all this, all of the steps are required in order for the data to get saved. Connect to the database, create the SQL instruction, give it the values we want, and then say, okay, go ahead and do your work, do your thing. So let's try this. We'll see if it runs or if we have to modify it at all. I'm going to go back to my form, and I'll try to save it. Okay. Small syntax problem. And had I paid attention to my code editor, it actually tells me right here, it's highlighted in yellow. I named it incorrectly. It says this doesn't exist. I had it right on my next line. I accidentally typed the full word string. It's just str. Those are, no, that's PHP Storm. Those are just code hints. So it actually shows you when you call the bind param method, the first value is what parameter are we filling? Second parameter, what value are we putting inside? Third parameter, what type of data is it? And last parameter, how long is it? So if you're using Visual Studio Code, you may not see those little prompts in gray. One of the reasons I like PHP Storm. I'll try again, so I'll refresh, resubmit my form. No errors, so that's good. Did it actually save anything? Well, we can go to MySQL Workbench. And I'll just make a new tab. And now I want to look inside the database and see if anything actually got saved. So to do this, I can just run the command select star from persons. First, I need to run my use command. So there's now one record with the name and email I entered from the form, and the database has automatically assigned a unique ID. So if you're connected to my database and you fill out the form and hit submit, whatever data you put in your form should show up in here. So let me go back and submit it one more time. So I'll submit one more. If I run my query again, now I'll have 2 users, and each one is going to get the next available ID number. So here's all the code. And it's fine if you connect to this database. Sorry? I can't zoom. No, it doesn't zoom. If it's hard to see, you might suggest you may want to sit by sitting a little closer. It doesn't zoom, I'm sorry. I mean, there's a balance. I can make the font bigger, but that also means you're going to be able to see less of the code at one time if I do that too. Let me try and make it a bit bigger. Doesn't seem to do much. Okay, here's what we will do. The video recording for this part of the class seems to have worked. I'm going to upload all of the code we did today to a new repository on GitHub so you have access to it. Okay, please don't delete the database or do other things, but you're free to connect to this database and try this at home. Try to connect and try to compare your code if it's not quite working. What do you have versus what do I have on the GitHub repository? I have lots of office hour time Monday and Tuesday afternoon, so feel free to book an appointment if you need help and you want to get it working. Either get the software working, or if you're having issues with the code, come and see me Monday or Tuesday. Or if you're working on it over the weekend and you're having an issue, you can send me an email, copy and paste what the error is you're getting, maybe attach your code, and I will try to help fix it. We'll go over this again at the start of class next week. But I'd like before, if things aren't running properly for you, during class next week isn't a good time for us to try and address that, okay? Let's try and get it fixed before then. I also can have some availability Wednesday. If you want to come and see me Wednesday, there's no particular time, but send me an email and let me know a convenient time for you to come on Wednesday, and I'm happy to help people. But I'd like everybody to be at the point where this is working at the start of class next week. And I have lots of time to help you sort it out before then with whatever your issues are. I'll also try to find out what's happening with our AWS connection. But it's no problem for you to use us to all use this database for now. That's fine. Okay, so I will sort AWS out. I will help everybody who needs help before next class, but you just need to let me know. I need some help. I don't know if there's another class in here now. If there isn't, I can stick around for a little while. There is? Okay. I'm not sure. I have a meeting at 2:30, but I will stick around for a little while because I know there's lots of people who need help.